My sort of initial gut reaction was, if you are in the world of finance and you are experimenting on your users through your user interface, when are you violating your fiduciary duty? Right? Can you, if you have a hypothesis that changing a button from green to red may lead to a worse outcome, are you allowed to test that? Because if you test it and you're right, can't you say, well, you were doing something that you thought would be bad for your users, and indeed you proved it was bad for your users, and that's against your fiduciary responsibility as an advisor? Right? So you sort of have to say, well, I don't have a hypothesis, would be the legal protection there, and you're just trying to test for things that improve the outcome for investors. But it gets a little weird, in my opinion, when you start doing this A/B testing in the world of finance, right? What your legal and moral obligations are.
Yeah, by the way, Max in the comments said it was Lib or he. So thanks, Max, for correcting us on that. But do you think they're able to sleep at night because they justify it as like that nudging allows their clients to create better portfolios or maintain their portfolios better, like almost like reduce that babysitter tax of why we have fiduciary or financial advisors, and that's how they would justify. Like if you're working at that firm, they would say, yes, we are kind of messing with the algorithm, but this is in our client's best interest. And whether they know that or not, objectively is a whole different story. But that's maybe the way they justify it, the way they're thinking about it. But like you said, the other thing is the fiduciary responsibility side, as you and I both know, is like the regulators and stuff are like kind of way behind on modern technology. And so like, I don't, there's certain things like when you take, tests for like the NFA or whatever, it talks about like newspaper and radio ads. It doesn't talk about like the internet at all. So like how far behind, like you're saying, like that is, I never really thought about what you're just saying. It's like, how much does that change your fiduciary responsibility if you're just changing colors or naming conventions around the portfolio construction, and that's nudging the end client?
Well, it's always very interesting to me to have these conversations with financial advisors who, I think a lot of financial advisors would argue a huge part of their value add is being a behavioral coach. And there's all sorts of written literature as to trying to quantify that behavioral alpha, I think is what Vanguard ended up calling it. But in my conversations, it's all very dependent on the end client. So as an example, there have been advisors that I've worked with that have implemented tactical strategies that ultimately said, you want the clients don't want to see all this action. They've really bought into, inaction as being valuable. We need to hide all that action that's happening within a ticker, a single ticker. Just had a conversation with an advisor this week who said the exact opposite, who said, no, my clients really want to see a little bit of activity within the portfolio. Now, this is where things get really interesting, because if you take a tactical strategy and you wrap it up in a single ticker, what that allows the client to do is they no longer see all the tactical changes that are occurring, but it'll be painfully obvious at the end of the quarter or the year exactly what that tactical strategy is contributing to the portfolio, because it's all summed up in that one little line item in the return, right? Right or wrong, thinking about portfolio contribution, you shouldn't analyze the line item, but that's what they're going to see. That tactical sleeve is in that one fund that's doing all the tactical changes, and the return is crystal clear. If, however, you unwrap it and the advisor runs the tactical strategy themselves, and they're buying and selling all these different ETFs or securities, well, there's no real way for the individual to sort of isolate that part of the return in their portfolio compared to the rest of their portfolio if it's only a sleeve. And so there's all these games, and I hate to use the word games because it sounds nefarious, but there's all these considerations that have to be made when you're running money for people as to how they are going to ultimately see the results. And the way you manage money may change based upon the way they see the results and how you think they might react to that. Do they want to see it isolated? Do they want to see all the turnover and changes? Do you want to hide the contribution? Or do you want the contribution to be crystal clear? None of it's necessarily obvious until you sort of figure out the type of client that's ultimately allocating. But these are all trade-offs that the return can be identical of the actual strategy, but these can all lead to very different client behavioral outcomes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't want to name names on platforms, but it's always interesting when you're talking to clients or potential clients, and you have them like, they're like, let me pull up my, my account or my portfolio. and they basically can't find any information. It's really interesting how some of the most well-known platforms, it's so hard to like find out how you've done over time, what you actually hold, what's your P&L year to date. Like it's really weird, like the obfuscation around that. But then isn't it Wealthfront, I believe, that will have like a pop-up if you go to like sell something and they're like, there's a tax implication if you do this. Are you sure you want to do that? And they're trying to even nudge them, and they're using the rubric of like tax rebalancing issues.
Yeah, I think that was actually Betterment.
Betterment. Okay.
I think the only reason I know it's Betterment is I'm good friends with Dan Egan, who was the sort of head of behavioral studies over there for a long time, and I remember him talking about that. But yeah, those little nudges of saying, hey, you want to de-risk. I think it was specifically related to people panicking during a market drawdown and wanting to de-risk their portfolio. And what Betterment would do was say, if you make this allocation change, say from a 80-20 to a 60-40 because you're feeling panicked, it's going to incur this many specific dollars in taxes. And by quantifying it in dollars, people are so averse to having to pay taxes and knowing the exact dollars, often it would prevent people from taking that behavioral jump. Now, again, whether that's right or wrong, what if the client is fantastic at timing the market?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, but it's interesting how the display of information genuinely changes behavior. And it's something we don't talk a lot about in this industry, but it's something that comes up all the time for anyone who manages financial products, because it's this line item risk that we're constantly dealing with when you launch an ETF or a mutual fund. Advisors are trying to build portfolios out of funds, but clients are often scrutinizing individual holdings. And sometimes the advisor will say, I am holding this for a great reason, but it's coming up in every single client meeting, and I just can't deal with it anymore. And so I'm selling it, even though it was part of a holistic plan. And that happens all the time because, again, the optimal portfolio is first and foremost the one an investor can hold. And if the investors keep complaining about a specific holding, then the advisors are concerned about the clients leaving them, obviously hurting their business, but also just changing plans, which might not be in the best interest of the client.